The fake date. Inviting your ex to a family wedding would probably be less awkward than showing up alone. At least, that's what I told myself as I stared at the fancy, floral embossed invitation in my hand. My cousin Sarah's wedding was set to be the event of the year. Champagne fountains, string quartets, and enough designer gowns to bankrupt half the city. And of course, Liam would be there. With his fiancée. His perfect fiancée. I groaned, tossing the invitation onto my cluttered coffee table. My best friend, Hannah, perched on the couch next to me, sipping her third glass of wine and watching me spiral. "Okay," she said, setting her glass down. "Here's what we're not going to do. Show up solo and spend the whole weekend pretending not to care while Liam parades his new guy around like a trophy. You need a plan, Ethan. A solid plan." I shot her a withering look. "What do you suggest? Kidnap a random guy off the street?" She grinned mischievously. "Not random. Someone hot. Someone charming. Someone who can make you look like the one who's moved on." "That's actually insane." "Insane works." She leaned closer, eyes sparkling with the kind of chaotic energy that usually landed me in trouble. "You could hire someone. You know, like a fake date." I laughed, but her expression didn't waver. "Hannah, no. That's ridiculous and desperate." "And effective," she interrupted. "You're not going to find someone in time otherwise. And you cannot let Liam think you're still pining for him." I wanted to argue, but she had a point. The thought of Liam's smug smile made my stomach churn. "Fine," I muttered. "But if this blows up in my face, I'm blaming you." That's how I found myself scrolling through an online dating for hire service, whatever it was. It felt equal parts absurd and humiliating. Most of the profiles looked like they belonged to aspiring actors or overconfident influencers. Just as I was about to give up, one profile caught my eye. Julian Carter. He had this effortless confidence in his photo, messy dark hair, a sharp jawline, and a smirk that practically oozed charm. His bio was short: professional conversationalist, occasional dancer, excellent fake boyfriend. I hesitated for a moment before sending a message. Meeting Julian in person was somehow more intimidating than messaging him. We'd agreed to meet at a trendy coffee shop downtown, and when he walked in, I immediately felt out of my depth. He was tall, dressed in a leather jacket that somehow made him look both rugged and sophisticated, and his smile could have lit up the whole room. "Ethan, right?" he asked, sliding into the seat across from me. "Yeah," I stammered, cursing myself for sounding like a nervous teenager. He laughed, a low, easy sound. "Relax, I don't bite, unless it's in the job description." I blinked at him, unsure if he was joking. Okay. So, here's the deal. My cousin is getting married this weekend, and my ex will be there with his fiancée. I need someone to, pretend to be my boyfriend. Just for the weekend." Julian leaned back, studying me with an amused expression. "And you're sure you don't just want to make your ex jealous?" "No," I said, a little too quickly. "It's not about that. I just don't want to look pathetic." He nodded thoughtfully. "All right, I'm in. But you should know I don't do anything halfway. If we're going to sell this, we need a story. How we met, how long we've been together, your favorite thing about me." He winked, and I felt my face heat up. Over the next couple of days, Julian and I rehearsed our relationship. We met at my apartment to plan our story, which turned into him teasing me relentlessly about my inability to lie convincingly. "So, you're saying we met at a bookstore?" Julian said, lounging on my couch. "That's cute. Romantic. But believable? Not unless you stop stammering every time I look at you." "I don't stammer," I protested, glaring at him. He raised an eyebrow. "Really? Because you just did." I threw a pillow at him, and he caught it effortlessly, laughing. Despite his teasing, Julian was surprisingly good at this. He helped me memorize our how we met story, suggested little details to make our relationship seem more genuine, and even made me laugh when I felt like crawling under a rock. By the time the wedding weekend arrived, I was equal parts nervous and grateful. Julian picked me up early Saturday morning, looking effortlessly gorgeous in a tailored suit. I, on the other hand, felt like a walking ball of anxiety. "You ready for this?" he asked as we drove to the venue, his tone light but reassuring. "Ready to humiliate myself in front of my entire family and my ex?" "Totally," I grumbled. Julian reached over and gave my hand a quick squeeze. "Relax, Ethan. I've got you." The wedding venue was as extravagant as I'd feared, a sprawling countryside estate with perfectly manicured gardens and chandeliers in every room. As soon as we arrived, my family descended on us like vultures. "Ethan, who's this handsome man?" my aunt gushed, practically pushing me aside to get a better look at Julian. "Julian," he said smoothly, flashing her a dazzling smile. "Ethan's boyfriend. It's so nice to meet you." I expected my aunt to interrogate him, but Julian charmed her effortlessly, answering every question with a warmth and wit that left me both impressed and slightly jealous. Liam showed up shortly after, looking as polished and smug as ever. His fiancée, Daniel, was every bit as perfect, tall, blonde, and annoyingly nice. "Ethan," Liam said, his tone just a little too pleasant. "It's good to see you." "You too," I lied, forcing a smile. Julian stepped closer, slipping his arm around my waist. "So, this must be Liam," he said, his voice casual but with an edge that made my heart race. "Ethan's told me so much about you." Liam's smile faltered slightly, and I had to fight the urge to laugh. The rehearsal dinner that night was a blur of awkward small talk, stolen glances, and Julian playing the part of the perfect boyfriend. He charmed my cousins, impressed my parents, and even managed to outshine Liam, which was no small feat by the end of the night. I was exhausted, but strangely content. Julian and I sat outside on the estate's sprawling patio, sipping wine and watching the stars. "You did good tonight," I said, breaking the comfortable silence. Julian smiled, his eyes glinting in the moonlight. "Told you I don't do anything halfway." For a moment, we just sat there, the air between us charged with something I couldn't quite name. When Julian turned to look at me, his expression soft and unreadable, my heart skipped a beat. "You okay?" he asked, his voice quieter now. "Yeah," I said, though I wasn't sure if I believed it. Because the truth was I wasn't okay, not even close. Something about Julian, his smile, his laugh, the way he made me feel seen, was starting to feel a little too real. And that terrified me. Weddings are supposed to be joyful, but by the time Sarah walked down the aisle, I felt like I was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. Julian, on the other hand, seemed perfectly composed, sitting beside me with that same easy charm that had won over my entire family. "Relax," he murmured as we watched the vows. "You look like you're about to pass out." "I'm fine," I whispered back, even though my stomach was in knots. Julian smirked, leaning closer so only I could hear. "You've said I'm fine about 20 times this weekend, and I've yet to believe it once." I shot him a glare, but the warmth in his eyes softened me. It was unnerving how easily he could make me feel safe, like he had everything under control. The reception was where things really started to unravel. The band was incredible, the drinks were flowing, and everyone was in a celebratory mood. But all I could focus on was Liam. He and Daniel looked like they'd stepped out of a glossy wedding magazine, dancing, laughing, and basking in the attention. Julian must have noticed me watching because he nudged me gently. "Wanna dance?" "What?" I turned to him, startled. "Dance," he repeated, standing and offering me his hand. "You're overthinking again, and the best cure for that is a little movement." I hesitated, but the teasing challenge in his smile was impossible to resist. Taking his hand, I let him lead me to the dance floor. As we moved to the rhythm of the music, I couldn't help but feel self-conscious. But Julian's confidence was infectious, and before I knew it, I was laughing as he spun me in a dramatic circle. "There he is," Julian said, his voice low and warm. "The Ethan who doesn't care what anyone thinks." I rolled my eyes, but a smile tugged at my lips. "You're ridiculous." "Maybe," he said, pulling me closer, "but you're having fun, aren't you?" I didn't answer, but I didn't need to. The way I leaned into him said it all. Later, I stepped outside for some air, leaving Julian to charm yet another group of my relatives. The cool night breeze was a welcome relief, but my peace was short-lived. "Ethan." I froze at the sound of Liam's voice. Turning, I found him standing a few feet away, looking as polished and smug as ever. "What do you want, Liam?" I asked, my tone sharper than I intended. He shrugged, slipping his hands into his pockets. "Just wanted to catch up. You've been busy." I crossed my arms, bracing myself for whatever he was about to say. "That guy you brought. Julian, right?" "He's interesting," Liam said, his tone laced with condescension. I bristled. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing," he said quickly, but the smirk on his face told a different story. "I just think it's funny. You never brought anyone like that around when we were together." I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, Julian appeared beside me, his arm sliding around my waist. "Everything okay here?" Julian asked, his voice calm but edged with steel. Liam hesitated, clearly taken aback by Julian's sudden appearance. "We're fine, just talking." Julian's grip on me tightened slightly, a subtle but unmistakable gesture of support. "Well, I think we've talked enough for one night. Come on, Ethan." He didn't wait for Liam to respond, guiding me back inside with a quiet authority that left me both impressed and a little breathless. By the time we returned to our room that night, I felt like I'd been through an emotional ringer. Julian, ever perceptive, didn't push me to talk. Instead, he poured us each a glass of wine and sat down beside me on the bed. "You okay?" he asked, his voice soft. I nodded, though I wasn't entirely sure if it was true. "You don't have to keep pretending with me, you know," he said, his gaze steady. "If this is too much, just say the word." I looked at him, at the way he seemed so effortlessly kind and understanding, and felt a pang of guilt. "Why are you doing this?" I blurted out. He frowned slightly. "Doing what?" "Being this nice, supportive, acting like you actually care." Julian set his glass down and turned to face me fully. "Because I do care, Ethan. This might have started as a job, but it doesn't feel like one anymore." "Not to me." My heart skipped a beat. "Julian, He held up a hand, cutting me off gently. "I'm not saying this to pressure you. I think you should know." For a moment, all I could do was stare at him. The honesty in his eyes, the vulnerability, was almost too much to handle. "I don't know if I can do this," I admitted quietly. "I don't know if I'm ready." Julian nodded, a small, sad smile tugging at his lips. "I get it. But I also think you're stronger than you give yourself credit for." The next morning, Julian was gone before I woke up. A note on the nightstand explained that he'd gone for a run and would be back in time for the farewell brunch. But as I sat there, staring at his neat handwriting, I realized something important. I didn't want him to leave. By the time Julian returned, I had made up my mind. The brunch was winding down when I finally found him outside, standing near the garden and looking out at the sprawling estate. "Hey," I said, my voice a little shaky. He turned, his expression unreadable. "Hey." For a moment, we just looked at each other. Then, before I could lose my nerve, I stepped closer. "I'm sorry," I said. "For everything. For being scared. For not saying what I should have said last night." Julian raised an eyebrow. "And what should you have said?" "That I don't want this to end," I said, my voice trembling but firm. "That I don't want you to leave and go back to being just a memory. That I'm scared out of my mind, but I think you might be worth it." Julian's expression softened, and for a moment I thought he might laugh. But instead, he closed the distance between us, his hands finding my shoulders. "You think?" he teased gently. I rolled my eyes, but before I could respond, he kissed me. It wasn't like the kiss we'd shared that first night, hesitant and fleeting. This one was sure and steady, filled with a kind of warmth that made me feel like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. When we finally pulled apart, Julian grinned. "For the record, I think you're worth it, too." I laughed, the sound light and free. And for the first time all weekend, I felt like everything was going to be okay. Because Julian wasn't just a fake date anymore. He was something real. Something I didn't want to let go of. And this time, I wasn't going to.